We're not eating very well at the moment. More than half of all regions don't meet very basic dietary guidelines, for example, on the amount of fruit and vegetables that people eat or on the amount of red and processed meat. Globally, imbalanced diets are actually the #1 health burden in the world and in most regions. And the food sector as a whole is responsible for more than a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions and therefore a major contributor to climate change. Imbalanced diets are expected to increase in importance in the future. As people go richer, they consume more red meat products, for example, more oils, and that increases both the burden on health as well as on the environment. So what we set out to do is to analyze dietary changes that could counter those developments. So we analyzed 4 dietary scenarios: the reference scenario that has the projected dietary patterns of 2050, as well as a scenario that looks at the possibility if everybody would adopt global dietary guidelines that include minimum amounts of fruits and vegetables and limits to the consumption of red meat, sugar, and total calories. And lastly, we also looked at vegan and vegetarian dietary patterns that both conform to those global dietary guidelines but include less amounts of animal-based products. We found that if people change from their expected diets to global dietary guidelines, you could save about 5 million deaths in 2050, reduce greenhouse gas emissions by about 1/3, and generate public benefits of about 1 trillion that is composed of saved healthcare expenditure and avoided climate change damages. If you would then go to more plant-based diets, then you could actually save 7 and 8 million deaths and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by about 2/3 and generate public health benefits and avoided climate damages of about 1.5 trillion. Surely huge changes would be needed to actually realize those dietary scenarios. For example, just to go from the expected diets to the global dietary guidelines would require that red meat consumption would be reduced by half globally and by 2/3 in Western countries, as well as in Latin America, for example. And fruit and vegetable consumption would need to be doubled in some regions, such as South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So clearly, huge changes would be needed. But we hope that by quantifying those changes and the benefits that those changes could entail, we would encourage some thinking about how we could get there. We think that by combining the health and the environmental side of the analysis, we can give some framing to what would be a healthy and environmentally sustainable diet. From health perspective, any changes towards more plant-based diets would be beneficial. But we find that on the environmental side, it would actually not be enough to just go to the dietary guideline scenario if you would want to reduce food-related greenhouse gas emissions to the same extent that all greenhouse gas emissions need to be reduced to basically keep global warming below 2 degrees. So the environmental analysis really indicates that we seriously need to think about adopting more plant-based diets in concert with achieving greater technological advances. We hope that the value of environmental and health benefits that we estimated would encourage policymakers to create the right frameworks for dietary change to happen. This could include, for example, public health programs that are aimed to encourage more healthy eating patterns, but also fiscal measures that would adjust prices to make healthy food options relatively cheaper than unhealthy food options.